Well, I've started this sermon series called Postcards from Bethlehem, and I want to continue that with you this morning. And the idea of this series is this. If someone you knew was in Bethlehem, in the time that Jesus was born, taking in all of what was happening there, all of these things that we celebrate in Advent and Christmas, and they were writing you a postcard every day. The question is, what would be written on those? If they were telling you what they were seeing and experiencing and beginning to understand, what would they be writing on those postcards to you? Last week we talked about the shepherds who got the news first, and the message was that the story of Jesus, despite the very hard part of his crucifixion being in the middle of the story, that the story of Jesus begins and ends with the free and beautiful joy of God. And this morning what I'd like to talk about is the mystery of the incarnation. The mystery of God taking on flesh, clothing himself in our humanity. If this homily were a postcard, what would be written on the back of it very simply would be this. It would say, "Dear friend, in the great mystery of the incarnation, there are secrets being told." And I want to share some of those secrets with you this morning. I want to start this morning by reading to you what is, to me, one of the most mysterious and intriguing of the Old Testament prophecies about the Messiah. You've probably heard it before. You maybe have even seen it on a Christmas card. It's from Isaiah chapter 9. And it goes like this. "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulders. And his name shall be called Wonderful, Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, and Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and his peace there shall be no end, upon the throne of David and over his kingdom, to order it and establish it with judgment and justice from that time on forward, even forevermore. The zeal of the Lord of hosts will accomplish this." Now you might not know this, but part of what intrigues me this, because I'm a bit of a geek when it comes to original languages in the Bible. And when it says that his name, two of those names stand out to me. I mean, well, Wonderful. His name shall be called Wonderful. That's how I feel about the Lord. But when it says his name shall be called Mighty God, in Hebrew, that's a phrase, Il Gibor, and it's only used of Jehovah God. So if you're a Jew and you're hearing this, here's what you're hearing. There is a baby that's going to be born into the earth who is somehow Jehovah God, who is Yahweh. And then he says, his name shall be called Everlasting Father. But it's really not even Everlasting Father. In Hebrew, it's the Father of eternity. Unto us a child is born, and his name is the Father of eternity. And if you're like me, you hear that and you go, well, how does that work? That's a little bit mysterious. And you know, the Hebrew scriptures, they contained all kinds of prophecies about a Messiah, going all the way back to the story of Eve in the beginning of Genesis, because one of the words spoken to Eve after the fall was that one of her descendants, someone who was of her seed, would eventually come along to crush the serpent's head that had deceived them. Some of those prophecies spread across the Old Testament. They were about a great king coming. Some of them were about a suffering servant, like if you know Isaiah chapter 53. And even one, a prophecy through the prophet Micah, foretold that this promised one would be born in Bethlehem, of all places, which was, we would use the word, a backwater, a hick town, a nothing place. And they must have, in that day, they must have heard Micah's prophecy and thought, what kind of king would be born in Bethlehem? Those prophecies, they came true in Jesus, and we could look at that and we could say, yep, Jesus is the one. He's the true Savior, and Christianity is the true religion, so we know we believe the right thing, and that's that. And honestly, I think that's where a lot of people, I'm going to be honest this morning. I think that's where most Christians stop when they think about the manger, when they think about Advent and Christmas. They think, yep, Jesus is the true one who's born in the world. Yay, Jesus. End of story. And they think there's nothing else really to see. That's where people stop when it comes to pondering the manger, unless they gaze into the manger a little longer, and unless they somehow understand or begin to understand that there are greater realities to be seen that we haven't seen yet, that we need to see. I like to call them secrets because that's a word that Jesus used. I don't know if you remember that story. It's in Matthew chapter 13 when the disciples come to Jesus and they're kind of frustrated with Jesus. And they say, why do you tell all these parables? Why don't you just speak to people plainly? They're basically saying, like, tell people what to believe. Tell people what to do. Why are you telling all these stories? And Jesus' answer is that people need to come to know what he called the secrets of the kingdom of the heavens. And then he goes on to say that the way it works is that once you really look closely and you begin to see and understand these secrets, these greater realities, he says, then you're going to see a little more and a little more. This is how it works. And then a little more. So if God taking on our human form, becoming one of us as it were, is a big deal, and I think how could it not be? What then are the secrets that are slipping through the cracks in the boards of that stable that we should be tuning into? And I have 3 that I'd like to share with you this morning. The first is this. We see when we gaze into the manger that mysteriously God is not who we expected he would be. He's humble. He doesn't think about power. We just heard that in our Advent reading this morning that Linda picked out. He doesn't think about power the way that we have learned to think about power and to use power over other people. And this is what is actually unique about Christianity as a faith. I think so often Christians get stuck at this place where they go, yeah, Christianity is the true religion, and that's what we need to know about it. But what's really striking about the Christian story, about the story of Jesus, is that this is a story that you simply don't find anywhere else. I mean, have you ever thought about it? What other faith in the world has this crazy story about God coming down and becoming a human being? It's true that there have been in history, in various religions, stories of gods taking on human form. That's true. But in all of those stories, the gods who take on human form turn out to be selfish, like human beings. They turn out to be petulant, like human beings. They turn out to be manipulative, like human beings. And the reason is because we have this, I was going to say tendency, this penchant as human beings to craft gods in our own image. But here we have the creator of all things, the giver of life and breath in the form of a vulnerable child. And when he would grow up, he would not turn into what people expected. He's still not what people expect. This is the humble, self-giving, self-sacrificing, open-hearted, kind God who rejects hatred and violence and shows us the way of love. He's still not what people expect. So we continue to craft a God in our own image, which is why the American Jesus is so often attached to judgmentalism and hatred and violence. So I want to say to you this morning, in the words of a very profound poem, let the stable still astonish. Let the stable still astonish. Because if what you see in the manger does not challenge your view of God, the view of God that would make him hate all the people I hate and despise all the people I despise and operate with people the way I tend to operate. If God doesn't seem strikingly different from us, we have not gazed into the manger long enough. So mysteriously, God does not, he doesn't turn out to be who we would expect him to be. And then the second thing is this. And I've never preached this before, but I think it every Christmas as I take in the serene image of Christ asleep in the manger or asleep in his mother's arms. And it's this. God does not seem panicked about the world. I don't mean that he wasn't concerned when he came and that he isn't concerned. He came because he's concerned for us, because he loves us. But today I hear Christians screaming that God is panicked about sin and sex and America and politics. And I don't bring these up to make this an Advent issues sermon. But when Christians are so freaked out about everything, they give the impression that God is that freaked out about everything, that God is panicked, that everything in the world is on the verge of spinning out of control. So here's a mystery for you. God is sleeping peacefully in the manger. If it were up to us, we'd be like, you don't have time for a nap. The world is falling apart. You don't have time for a nap. We can't wait 30 years for you to grow up and tell people what to do. You got to tell people what to do right now. But God is sleeping peacefully in the manger. God is striding his way through the world, knowing that his goodness will vanquish everything in its path in good time. Reminds me of a verse in 1 John chapter 2, verse 8, where John says, the darkness is already passing away and the true light is already beginning to shine. It's already happening. Which reminds me of the beautiful words of Julian of Norwich. All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. God is not panicked. Yeah, the world's a mess. Yeah, we're a mess. But nothing is ever going to defeat the goodness and the love of God. Then here's the third thing. The third thing is that here in the manger is the beginning of the great and astounding revelation of who God really is and how he wants to relate to us. There are lots of verses that say what this verse says, but I want to read to you from something the Apostle Paul said in the first chapter of his Colossian letter. After he says that God has delivered us from the power of darkness and carried us into the kingdom of the Son of his love, he then says this about Jesus. He is the icon of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. Now listen to this. He's talking about the one born in this manger. For by him all things were created, all things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created through him and for him, and he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. So, what this means is that God, after walking with his people for a long time, after revealing himself in many ways, as the writer of Hebrews says in the beginning of Hebrews 1, in these last days he's spoken to us by his Son. And so the way that we know what God is like is we know it by looking at Jesus. Beginning with this infant child, Jesus. You've heard me say this before, quote this quote before from Brian Zond. Maybe you'll remember it. God is like Jesus. God has always been like Jesus. There has never been a time when God was not like Jesus. We did not always know this. And lots of people still don't know this. We did not always know this, but now we do. And what do we discover at the manger about how God wants to relate to us? Well, surprise of surprises, despite all the ways that religion has been used to shame people, we discover at the manger that God is not ashamed of us. He doesn't stand back and hold back from us. You know, that's what it was. You remember the whole thing with Jesus touching people in the Gospels? Like this, these people are sinners. They're unclean. Their diseases have made them unclean. Their sins have made them unclean. Their lack of good piety has made them unclean. You can't touch these people. And Jesus is going around touching everybody. And religious leaders, the Pharisees, they're freaking out. He's touching people because God This is how God sees us. Doesn't hold back. He enters right in. He makes himself at home in our dirty barn, in our very real lives. In his book, God is in the Manger, Dietrich Bonhoeffer wrote these words. And that is the wonder of all wonders, that God loves the lowly. God is not ashamed of the lowliness of human beings. God marches right in. He chooses people as his instruments, and he performs his wonders where one would least expect them. God is near to lowliness. He loves the lost, the neglected, the unseemly, the excluded, the weak, and the broken. Maybe the way I want to say this to you this morning is this. God doesn't stand far off. He draws near. That's what we see in Jesus. Draws near. He's not keeping a distance. He's not afraid of his holiness being spoiled by being near to us, by being with us. I got to tell you that the last couple of nights of a night in Bethlehem here at LifeSpring, I've had an experience I've never had when we've done this before. This is our fourth one? Mm-hmm. Fourth time we've done this. A couple before the pandemic and now a couple after. And every year I have played the part of one of the three wise men wandering around. And one of the things we do is we come in here to the manger as people come in and behold this scene with Mary, Joseph, and the Christ child. And something happened this year. I don't know why. I don't know if it's just different people who came, or I have no idea. God, I don't know. But several people in the last two nights when they've come in here, and we wise men have just been kind of standing at the back, and Joseph standing here, and Mary sitting in this chair holding Christ's child, kind of tucked back in the stable. And several people have come in and begun to weep. And it was a little unnerving at first. We wise men didn't know quite what to do. We didn't do anything. But people came in and they just began to tear up. Nobody was saying anything. They were just taking in the scene. And I'm kind of a student of people, so I was stealing glances at their faces, trying to read. And what I saw on their faces was this mixture of joy and pain. It's as if in beholding the Christ child, we intuitively know that with him there is both compassion for our wounds and mercy for our shortcomings. It's crazy. It's like people came in and they saw this depiction of God coming in a vulnerable way. And it said to them, this is the God with whom you can be vulnerable. And you guys are crying here.
Yeah.
Lord have mercy. But do you see what I'm saying? It's like so much Christian religion is still telling us that God is relating to us from a distance, that we're going to spoil his holiness, that he's angry because we're not good enough. But this is the God who comes in the form of a vulnerable child and says, you can hold me. You can touch me. I will be near to you. And when I grow up, I will touch you. You know, every year that we've done this night in Bethlehem, I played this part of a wise man. And I've been doing it these last couple nights with Larry Alich and Kevin Farmer. And one of the blessings that we wise men get is that we hang out in the manger so that, when people come in, we can kind of bow down and present our gifts and just kind of give them a little, a little dramatic taste of the story. And one of the blessings is that we get to observe all the kids who come in to experience the live nativity. And I think the whole thing is just such a unique experience for a modern kid, right? Now, of course, there are the kids who come in and they just come in and they're like, yep, saw it, gotta go, And it's like, in fact, one little kid, he came in, he paused for about a half a second and he just kept going. And Kevin turned to me and said, nothing to see here, so, but think about this. This is the video game generation of kids, and they come in and it's quiet, it's a little dark, there's no action, and yet there's something here. And it's like these kids can intuitively sense, a lot of them, like, there's something here you're supposed to get. There's something here you're supposed to take in. And I think it's just a unique experience for modern kids, this mysterious couple with this infant in this setting. And especially this year, we have seen these clusters of kids come in close around Mary and the Christ child and just stand there, sometimes for minutes, and take it in. Somewhere in their souls, in a way a child doesn't really have words for, they're wondering, what is this? Which is actually, to me, the question that all of us as adults should be asking. Should be looking into this manger, and we should be stopping and staring and asking, what is this that has happened here? And the answer to that question is this: it's more than you know. It's more than you've seen. I love this line from, if you've ever read the Narnia books by C.S. Lewis, C.S. Lewis makes the comment that there was once a stable that held something within it larger than our whole world. And I love that. And so it happens to me every year that I have a moment or moments where my imagination is seized by the mystery of this. And then the mystery turns into wonder. And I find myself gazing on the infant. In fact, it usually happens one of the first times when we're doing our little thing in here, one of the first times that I come and kneel down, right? And I always feel a little silly, right? Because it's usually like a young girl or a young woman in our church, holding this very lifelike doll. And, we're doing this so that people can kind of take in the scene, right? And then I come up and I kneel down and I look at this young woman and I look at this infant. And all of a sudden, like, the mystery of it, the wonder of it, God, like I look at that baby and I say, God coming into the world this big, one of these. And my first thought is this: God, you are so weird. I do. I just think, like, you are so, like, that's what I was trying to explain when I said, like, this is there's no other story like this. This is a crazy story. God comes into the world in the form of this vulnerable. So I think, God, you are so weird. But then it rises up before my heart again that here, all the meaning and promise of what it is to be a human being is on full display in this perfect little child. Here in this stable is the one who spoke all things into existence, nursing at his mother's breast, sleeping in her arms, and in that, inviting us into these secrets that we lost track of long, long ago. And I guess that's what I wanted to tell you this morning, is that in the great mystery of the incarnation, there are secrets being told. And I want to pray for you this morning, that you'll perceive the mystery, that you'll enter the mystery, that you'll hear the secrets.